We've been studying the book of Revelation, and today we will continue the series of the book of Revelation, and we're going to be going now to the church of Smyrna. We started the churches last Sunday. We entered the church of Ephesus, and we discussed that, and then we are going now into the church of Smyrna. This week, my sister was over at our house, at my parents' house, staying over. She came over for 2 weeks. Some of you met her. And as we were going through the piles of papers of my dad, he keeps everything. I mean, he had phone bills of, 10 years ago, in case he was afraid that someone would come and ask him if he paid his bill 10 years ago. And he keeps every single sheet of paper, everything, and there were just stacks and stacks of stuff. And we were going over. And as we were going over this, my sister found a paper as we were going over the papers that he had, from 30 years ago when we left Cuba. And she found some papers of him, which actually found in there in the papers were a record of the times that they had taken him to prison because of not being, not getting along or not being in accordance with the government. And in that paper, in those papers, they had it written down that he was classified as a counter-revolutionist who did not agree with the government that was present then. They let him know. They put a stamp on it. And they said, this is you. As we looked at that was supposed to be something negative. But as my sister and I looked at that, we looked at each other and we say, we are proud of that. We are proud of that. That he did not go along with the government, that he was not in favor of it, and they stamped him on that, and they let him know that he wasn't that. Today, as we confront the world that we live in, how are you looked at by your neighbors? How are you looked at by the world? Are you looked at as someone who goes along with the world? Or can anyone look at you and know that you are different? That you do not stand for what the world stands for? That you are different? Sometimes we try to look so much like other people that we can't make a difference. Sometimes we think that we can win people over by being like them. You're not going to do that. Believe me, the world is looking for something different. The world is looking for something better. As we look and we open our Bibles to the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 8. And here we find the church of Smyrna. And the angel of the church of Smyrna writes, these things, says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. Remember that in Revelation chapter 1, it gave us a revelation of Jesus. From verse 12 to 20, John gave us a revelation of Jesus that he saw. And in that revelation, he talked about one that was dead and now is alive. He talked about a Christ that had a sword coming out of his mouth. He talked about a Jesus who had fire coming out of his eyes. And therefore, John presents to us not a Jesus of Nazareth or a Jesus on the cross or a Jesus with a crown of thorns or a Jesus who was whipped and tortured. Now John shows here in the book of Revelation, he shows a different Jesus, a Jesus who is at the throne at the right hand of the Father. The Jesus that we have today And one of the mistakes that the church sometimes makes, that it concentrates too much. It's okay to do that, but a lot of times when it thinks about Jesus, it's thinking of Jesus of Nazareth that we read in the Gospels. That Jesus of Nazareth that we read in the Gospel is not the Jesus of the church today. The Jesus of the church today is an all-powerful Jesus, divine Jesus, who is at the right hand of the Father. We have Jesus, God, there, all-powerful, not looking like someone who's being persecuted or someone who's hungry or someone who just walked through all Galilee. We have a Jesus who's all-powerful. And we as a church, John presented that because we live in a time that we as a people must understand that this is the Jesus that you have. This is the Jesus you can trust in. This is the Jesus you can confide in as you walk through your life and as you go through everything in life. You have an all-powerful God who's there for you. And this powerful God became man, and he understands your feelings. He understands what you're going through. Now, as John goes through each church, he takes a small part of that Jesus, and he gives it to each church. And now to the church of Ephesus that we studied last week, he said, he that stands in the middle of the lampstands, in the midst of the lampstands, and has the stars in his right hand. And we spent a while talking about the message to the church of Ephesus. Now to the church of Smyrna, he says, and to the angel of the church of Smyrna, write, these things says, and here's the description that he gives of Jesus, the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. One of the things that I spent time when I was going through the book of Revelation is taking each description of Jesus and asking myself, why is it that one description is given to each of the churches? And I try to say, if a description is given to each of the churches, it must be because that description has to do with the message that is given to that church. And I begin to see that, and I saw that. This thing he says to the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. The church of Smyrna needed to understand that Jesus had overcome death. Smyrna needed to know that death is not the worst thing that can happen to us as human beings. Us as human beings, we have a problem with death. And it's because we have not even, as human beings, as Christians, we have not even looked at death at the way that we should. We looked at death as something to fear, as something that we think that everything is done. And it's very important that we learn as Christians that Jesus came and he died and he resurrected and he overcame death. And a lot of times today, I see so many of our people suffering for years and years after we have lost a loved one. And I can understand the part of missing the person, but Paul says, I do not want you to suffer as those who have no hope. And the understanding that Jesus overcame death. The understanding that death is nothing to God. That death will not separate us eternally. And that God has created a way for us to be with our loved ones eternally in a perfect state. That we understand that death is not the end. But sometimes even though we see it, even though we study it, we read it in the scriptures, we don't completely comprehend. And Jesus here tells the church of Smyrna, listen, these things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. See, when Jesus came to life, the resurrection is as powerful for the plan of salvation as the death of Jesus. As he came to life, he broke that barrier. He broke through the chains. He broke through the bars because death was the enemy of humanity. Thinking that once you die, no matter what you did, once you die, it was over. And with Jesus, when he broke through that, he said, listen, death is not the end. In fact, it is the beginning. It is the beginning of something great that he has for us. Why did he want to give them this assurance? Look at verse 9. The church of Smyrna is the only church that Jesus has nothing against. I know your works of tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. Smyrna is known as the church, the persecuted church. Smyrna had its bishop, his name Polycarp. History talks to us about Polycarp, and Polycarp was actually a disciple of John the Apostle. Smyrna went through a great persecution where people were being persecuted and people were being killed. Its bishop, its leader, Polycarp, who had been a disciple of John. The story tells us that he was born about the year 69 and died about the year 155 after Christ, and he became the leader, the pastor, the bishop of the church of Smyrna. And this was a man who impressed people with his sanctity and with his relationship with God. As they were persecuting the church there in Smyrna, they thought that by killing Polycarp, that maybe they would do away with the church. The leaders of the Christian church thought they should not search out to be a martyr. But if they had to be a martyr, they were privileged to be a martyr. But as they persecuted Polycarp, the people from the church, they hid him out in the country. They hid him in a house. But the Roman soldiers, who was persecuting the Christians, went out and they found him there. When they knocked on the door, Polycarp was not hiding. In fact, he went and he opened the door. And he let him in. And he offered him something to eat. And he said, listen, as you eat, can you please give me time to pray? The man was 85 years old. So they gave him time. They gave him 1 hour to pray. And he was praying for 1 hour. 1 hour turned into 2 hours. And the soldiers began to ask themselves, why are we even taking this man? Finally, after he was done, they took Polycarp to the Roman emperor. And as they took him there, they said, listen, you will have your life back. You can live if you denounce Jesus Christ. And he said, by denouncing Jesus Christ, you will give me but a few more years of life. It's all I have. But I will be giving up eternity. And they came up and they said, Polycarp, denounce Jesus right now or you will burn alive. And he said, which punishment do you think that I would rather take? Yours or God's? He said, I have served him for 85 years, and he has never done any injury to me. Why would I deny him today? They took him out, and they put sticks together, and they tied him to a stake. And they brought all the church together, all the Christians out there, because they wanted them to watch him as he would burn. And they say Christian history tells us that as Polycarp was there and the flames began to go around him, he began to sing hymns. He began to sing hymns. And it was almost as if the flames could not touch him. And as the fire was there, he would stand there alive, and finally a soldier with a large spear had to reach in and stab him. You see, this was the kind of persecution that the church was going through in Smyrna. And they were being persecuted, and God tells them in verse 9, I know your works are in tribulation, poverty, that according to humans you're poor, according to humans you're running, according to humans doing this, but God says, but you are rich. So as we see this, I ask myself, if they were being persecuted for their Christianity, and if they're being persecuted for God, and they were rich, what am I today? Am I poor or am I rich? They were standing up for God and willing to die for God. And Jesus says, but you are rich. You see, what's valuable, what's rich to God is not what's rich to society today. And the problem that we have is we have said, I am okay, and okay might mean that I have a house, I have a car, I have good suits to wear, I am comfortable, I have health, I have all these things, and we have decided what being good is. We have to ask ourselves, is that what God claims to be good? If God calls people who had to hide in caves, people who didn't have a food to eat, people who were put in prison, people who were being burned alive, people who didn't have anything at all because they had to be completely hiding and meeting in strange places and being able just to be able to pray together. If he calls them rich, then we must redefine what rich means. We must redefine that. Because we might think we're good, and we're actually poor. We might think we're good because we have certain things, and yet we're missing the most important things in our lives. We might be missing God. We might be missing a relationship with God. And a lot of times it tells us, how difficult it is for us. How difficult it is for us to just spend time with God. How difficult it is for us to dedicate time to God. People, we wake up at whatever time we need to in the morning to get to a job. But get to church, we can't do it on time. I know we repeat this and say this a lot, but sometimes we must ask ourselves, and we can see what we really value. We say, hey man, if I'm going to a job, I want to get fired, I don't have money. But yet we see no value at all. And if we don't take time for God during our day to encounter God, to have a relationship with God, we don't see any value in that if we miss it, it's okay. And if we don't have it, it's okay. And that to God says you are poor. You think you're rich, but you're poor. To them he said, you think you are poor. Because, sometimes as we go through difficulties, if he says, I know your works, your tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. Maybe they were thinking they were poor. Maybe right now you're going through a tribulation in your life. Maybe you're being tried. And you're going through a tribulation in your life. And you're feeling sorry for yourself because of the tribulation you're going through. And let me tell you, we've all experienced different tribulations. I've experienced tribulation. I've experienced persecution. And when you're going through the middle of a tribulation, through a persecution, you begin to feel sorry for yourself. You begin to say, why me, God? And God actually might be saying, I have you exactly where I want you. I have you exactly where I want you, and you think you're poor, but this is the richest time of your life. The richest time of our life might be as we're seeing a loved one suffer, and we need to come on our knees and ask God. The best time of your life might be when you have no money in your account, and you need to depend on God. The best time of your life might be when you lost a job. That might be the best time of your life because you had to go to God. The best time of your life might be when a disease attacked your body and you saw no hope and therefore you had to come to God. That might have been the richest part of your life. And right now, as you're going through a tribulation in your life, turn around, shake it off, because it might be the best time of your life. It might be the time where you see your limits as a human being. You see what you can't do. And you have to go to God and you have to ask Him to bless you. As those people ran in the caves to hide, they didn't know where they were going to eat. They had to depend on God. They didn't have a door to shut the cave, and they had to depend on His angels protecting them. See, and when you are within your human limits and you see how much you can do, how much you cannot accomplish for yourself, that's when you become the richest. That's when you become closer to God than ever. I know that your works and tribulation poverty says, but now the blasphemy of those who say you are Jews and are not, but are the synagogues of Satan. Let me tell you something. In each one of these churches, there's something that is common as I look at these churches. In each one of these churches, there are people that call themselves Christians, trying to go from within the church and trying to destroy the church. And this is something that has happened all the time. When you have false Christians, people who go to church because it's convenient to go to church. People who go to church but at the same time are trying to destroy the beliefs of the church. You see these people, well, you don't have to believe in that. That's okay. You just got to love Jesus. You don't have to do this, and you don't have to do that. These are the kind of people who will sit in church, and tonight you could probably see them at a nightclub in City Place if you went by. They come to church, they praise God, but they're out there and they're constantly trying to let people know that you don't have to do certain things. You don't have to do certain things. You don't have to fully commit to God. Church is just something you do. Church is just something you do. It is a lifestyle that you carry out, but that lifestyle is only for a little bit. As you go there, you dress like it, you hold your Bible right, you say the right things, but then your life out there is completely something different. They see Christianity as something you do, not something you are, not something that you live. It says here, do not fear for any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Talking about this tribulation. Smyrna comes from the word myrrh. Myrrh is a spice that was used to embalm bodies. But there's something special about myrrh. The myrrh will not give its fragrance unless you smash it. It must be smashed. And only when you smash myrrh would it let out its fragrance. And here we see these people as they were being persecuted.